Hey everybody, what's going on? My name is Frank Reynolds and welcome in to another episode of Is It Worth It? Where I review books across all genres and let you know which are worth your time. I'm excited as always for today's review because we're finally getting to talk about the latest addition to Joe Goldberg's saga with You Love Me, the third novel in the very popular You series. If you haven't read the second or third or first novel in the Joe Goldberg series yet, go back to my initial You review to see whether or not that book's worth it. Obviously, if you enjoy the Netflix series, you're going to enjoy this book series. It's one of the best adaptations to television/film that I have seen for a thriller series to date. I'm very interested to see how the third season of You is going to play out given what transpires in the third novel, You Love Me. We're going to get right into this thing and talk about what I liked about the novel. Like with the first two books, it is addictive. It's one of the highest compliments I can give a thriller novel. Very difficult to put this book down. For me, thrillers typically get a little bit redundant. That typically comes in the middle of a novel. This is not the case in You Love Me, nor was it the case in the first two books. The story moves in a way that is completely enthralling. Some of this is because I just want to know what happens. I'm invested in the series at this point, but a lot of it has to do with Kepnes' writing style. That's a testament to her, and she is just so in tune with Joe at this point. She knows this character through and through, and as a writer, that's one of the most important things that you can do is get a handle on the people you're writing. Her style and voice and everything about it that goes into her first-person narrative, it's what makes the book so unique and so compelling. It's wonderful. Everything about it is wonderful. The way that she's able to mold Joe as a protagonist throughout her writing. She balances the stream of conscious writing style so well with the unreliable narrator that is Joe. It's perfectly executed here. And I think it's so well executed because she does it in a way that simultaneously allows us to empathize with other characters, not as well as in the previous novels, but I'll get to that in a little bit. It's just so difficult to do, and I applaud her for the ability to continually surprise us with the way Joe is presented in these books. Speaking of her knowledge of Joe, she knows him so well that she's able to take a character that we very well know, he's very well defined by this point in the series, and completely transform him into something else in this book in a way that works. It's characterization, particularly character growth, at its absolute finest. It's actually a major theme in this third novel of the series, and while it's a little bit repetitive at times, it serves its purpose well, and it is really well executed, no doubt about it. You Love Me also moves in directions that you're not going to see coming. While this is sometimes as much a flaw as it is a pro, it's unexpected, and you gotta applaud Kepnes for her ability to do that with a character as predictably unpredictable as Joe. But speaking of those surprises that you won't see coming, I didn't like all of them, particularly the ending. The ending just really disappointed me overall. It has its ups and downs, but the last few chapters in particular, specifically the final chapter, big letdown. The twist, for me, didn't really work well. And even if it had, it just doesn't come across as authentic, at least not in the same way that the twists of the first two novels did. I'll still read the next novel in this series, and I'll do so with passion. Don't get me wrong. It's just that the way things are left hanging in the balance here at the end of the third novel are not nearly as interesting as they are in the first two. While the ending didn't sit well with me, I also found myself stunned by the beginning of this novel, and not in a good way. Put it this way, given how book 2 ends, I was very surprised with how this novel started. It took me by surprise, which Kepnes, again, is good at doing. But I just was perplexed by why and how we were starting where we did. It makes sense by the end. You do get the answers that you're seeking, but the way that it's done, I thought it could have been done better. The evolution of the characters we came to love and hate in book 2 isn't necessarily put into focus, especially early on in the book. And speaking of the characters that we loved and loved to hate in the second novel, the title was really misleading of the third book, and this could have just been me. I really thought You Love Me was going to have some kind of dual meaning, given that our main protagonist love interest in book 2 was love. So I thought that you might be referring to the new love interest of book 3, love referring to love from book 2, and me, as in Joe. It's really not the case, at least I didn't think so, and I don't know, I guess I was just waiting for that to happen because of the opportunity a unique title like that presented, and it just never quite materialized the way that I thought that it would. So again, could have just been me, but I think part of me was just waiting for that the whole time, and I was disappointed when it never quite culminated the way I expected it to. That's not a spoiler, by the way, for Love's role in book 3, because she does have a role. I'm not going to spoil anything about it for you here. Just know that I was not satisfied with the way the title presented itself. I mentioned how Kepnes has this ability to keep readers really engaged throughout the book. And she does this by not only making us interested in what Joe is going to do and what he has done and his character growth, but she also does it in a negative way with a ton of cliffhangers. It's really tacky the way that Kepnes uses the last page of a chapter to introduce a sudden cliffhanger. It just feels like a really cheap way to get people interested in reading the beginning of the next chapter. And sometimes the answers we seek are given to us in the first sentence of the next chapter. That is a cop-out. To me, as a writer, that is a cop-out for interesting people in turning the next page. You don't need to use that writing tactic here, like, to keep us motivated to read the book. Like, we're in the third book of this series. If you're still reading, you're invested. You're in. I want to be intrigued and ready to flip the page for reasons other than just simply wanting to know an answer to something presented in the last couple sentences of the chapter. I want to continue the story because I'm invested in the story. Just kind of comes off as a sham to me. Maybe it won't bother other people, but it's kind of lazy, just being honest. It's fine to do that every once in a while, but it happens. It might happen more often than not, which is not great. I also mentioned how Joe has a new love interest this time around. Her name's Mary Kay. And while I was very interested in Mary Kay and Joe's relationship throughout the novel, I wasn't too interested in the other side characters. That is not the case in the first 2 books for different reasons. In book 1, I loved to hate the side characters. In book 2, there were more likable side characters for me. Not all of them, but there were more likable side characters for me. But I was invested for different reasons, but invested nonetheless. Book 3 has new side characters that I didn't care about at all. While Joe and Mary Kay indulge in this sort of slow-burning romance that is very different from what's presented in the first 2 books, the side characters are fluff. They're there to move the story along rather than actually serve a purpose in Joe's life. And I think that Kepnes' ability to keep people engaged using those other individuals took a back seat to the main plot here, which negatively impacted the writing. Take Peach, for example, in book 1, or 40 in book 2. I mean, these are really interesting side characters who not only help move the story forward, but help develop Joe as a person and shape him into the guy that he is come book 3. There's no real side characters in this story that do that. They're simply here, they're means to an end. And it just was disappointing to not have that same connection that I did to other I'd call them antagonists. And gotta quickly touch back on Mary Kay, because while I liked her and I think that she was an interesting love interest throughout the book, she wasn't done as well as she could have been. She's no Beck or Love. At times she can be a little insufferable. There's a couple of side plots that could have been cut throughout this story that would have made her more likable, but they're not, and it makes her wishy-washy attitude really annoying come the later half of the book. Again, I didn't dislike her. I just thought that she could have been done a little bit better, because she is a strong love interest in a lot of ways, and she does help shape Joe as a person. But as a actual character, there were things that could have been improved upon. The pacing between those two and their blossoming relationship is awesome. It's really cool and it's really well done. But again, the side plots are just unnecessary a lot of times. Side note on those side plots: there's a character here who who does CrossFit, and wow, Caroline Kepnes must have taken a CrossFit class at one point in her life with the worst people to ever exist. She hates that sport. Did somebody who does CrossFit hurt this woman? Because wow, she can't stand it, and it's very apparent, and it's a little bit overdone in this book. It's something. So look, is You Love Me worth it? Again, we're talking sequels here, so if you've read the first two books, you're obviously gonna want to get your hands on this, but don't expect it to be as good as the first two. While still a relatively solid thriller, it's easily the weakest entry in the series to this point. You, in my opinion, is one of the best thrillers on the market, especially in the last 10 years. And Hidden Bodies is one of the best sequels to a thriller I've ever read, maybe one of the best sequels, period. You Love Me is an above average thriller, so in terms of its place in this series, it's the weakest, but it's not bad. It's just not quite on par with what we've come to expect from Caroline Kepnes and the Joe Goldberg saga so far. When we also take into account the fact that we've been waiting 6 years for this book, it's a bit of a letdown. Worth it, but a letdown. On the worthy meter, I gave You Love Me a 66 out of 100. Solid thriller score, but nowhere close to the scores of its first two predecessors. Thanks again for joining me on this review. If you enjoyed the review, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. We're putting up new content weekly, bi-weekly. We'll be back here in 2 weeks with another book review. Have a great holiday weekend. Stay safe out there, and try to get some reading done. And if you have any recommendations, please hit me up with those and I'll check into it. Thanks.